Hello and welcome to The Top Story, a podcast with the headlines of the day from our correspondents around the world. I'm Qizhi. Coming up in this edition, a peace deal between Israel and Hamas remains elusive as U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken ends his Middle East trip. Former U.S. President Barack Obama has addressed a crowd at the Democratic National Convention to rally support for presidential nominee Kamala Harris. And the Chinese Commerce Ministry is launching an anti-subsidy investigation into certain dairy products imported from the European Union. We begin in the Middle East. A peace deal between Israel and Hamas remains elusive as U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken ends his Middle East trip. Mediators from Egypt and Qatar had aspirations that the U.S. bridging proposal could bring the two sides closer to agreeing a deal. In other developments, Israel has retrieved the bodies of 6 hostages from the Gaza Strip. Jonathan Regev reports from Tel Aviv.
Of course, the United States does not directly speak to Hamas. They speak to Hamas through mediators, in this case Egypt and mostly Qatar. And we've heard, at least officially, that Hamas is not happy with these drafts presented by the Americans. Hamas calls it a bias towards the Israeli conditions. And therefore, the work that Blinken has with the Egyptians and with the Qataris and then facing Hamas is different than the atmosphere that was shared after his meetings in Jerusalem and in Tel Aviv. And on this issue, we have to say that also with Israel, there are those that are saying that it's not as if Israel is completely agreeing to what was said, despite the statement put out by Antony Blinken in Tel Aviv saying that Israel has agreed to the conditions set out by the United States. Some people in Israel are saying that it's not exactly like that there are still differences, especially regarding the Philadelphia corridor, which separates Egypt from the Gaza Strip. And on this issue, the differences are not only between Israel and Hamas, also between Israel and Egypt, and they have to be mediated one way or another. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu meeting today with hostage families, telling them that there are still differences and a deal might not be reached. It's not as if it's a done deal at the moment. So a lot of work to be done with Hamas, but also with Israel.
That was Jonathan Regev in Tel Aviv. In Gaza, at least 12 Palestinians have died in an Israeli strike on a school housing displaced families. The Israeli military claimed it struck a Hamas base embedded inside the school. Hamas rejected Israeli allegations that it uses schools and hospitals for military purposes. Hamas has also pushed back on a statement by U.S. President Joe Biden that accuses Hamas of backing away from a hostage deal with Israel. Akram al-Satari has more from Gaza.
Well, Hamas says that those proposals have been witnessing court changes. Israel has been modifying them all. Israel has been underlining the fact that they're going to stay in Netzarim and Philadelphia corridors, which is something that Hamas has rejected from the very beginning. Israel has said that they want to have a say over the number of Palestinians who are expelled out of the Gaza Strip abroad, and also this is something that Hamas rejects. Hamas said that Israel is also laying some conditions for the rebuilding process and for the withdrawal process, in which they said that they're going to stay to keep minimal forces in different parts of the Gaza Strip. Hamas said they are not ready to accept that, and they were calling upon them and the United States to try to develop something tangible, a timetable, a schedule, for the sake of just realizing the things that were accepted, the initial and original proposal that was accepted by Hamas in May, and that was proposed by President Biden, and that Biden himself said that it was the proposal that was initially accepted by Israel. Hamas seems not to be ready to engage in any kind of negotiation, and they have been signaling that those negotiations that were conducted and this round of negotiation has just failed, and they are waiting for the mediators to reconsider the decision and to renegotiate with Israel and with the Americans for the sake of developing something that would be acceptable by Hamas and by the Palestinian community.
That was Akram al-Satari reporting in Gaza. In North America, former U.S. President Barack Obama has taken the spotlight on the second day of the Democratic National Convention to rally support for presidential nominee Kamala Harris. He also said the November elections will be a tight race in a divided United States. Harris will formally accept the Democratic Party's nomination on Thursday. Philip Crowther reports from Chicago.
Well, look, like all the other speakers who we've seen here on stage at the United Center in Chicago tonight and last night, he's of course going to put his full support behind Kamala Harris and call on Americans to vote for her, obviously. But the support of Barack Obama means a lot more than that of others who we've seen here on this stage. He is still a hugely popular figure within the Democratic Party. And for him, this is a return to the political fray in his hometown of Chicago. It was 20 years ago when Barack Obama made his first big political convention speech. That was in Boston in 2004, very much seen as one of the stepping stones towards his successful presidential campaign in 2008. This, of course, is going to be the first black president of the United States putting his support behind the person who he wants to see as the second black president of the United States, also, of course, the first female president of this country. We do expect Barack Obama to become a lot more active on the campaign trail during these next 77 days before Election Day. He is very, very important to Kamala Harris on the campaign trail. We also expect the former First Lady, Michelle Obama, to give a speech on this stage. And maybe when she and when the former president look around this arena here and look at what has happened here in the United States on the political front over the last month, maybe they will talk about some of the similarities they see between the energy that has been building around the Democratic Party nominee Kamala Harris and what they might have experienced in 2008, when, of course, there was huge enthusiasm behind the campaign of then Senator Barack Obama. Well, look, usually what happens with a political convention for the nominee of that party is that they get a boost in the polls because the attention nationally is on them for 4 nights of prime time when a lot of Americans will be tuning in to what is happening here in Chicago. Essentially, the campaign of Kamala Harris is doing well. There has been a lot of enthusiasm behind her candidacy, and it is sometimes quite strange almost to think back at how things have changed in U.S. politics over the last month, with Joe Biden, of course, deciding he was no longer going to run for the presidency and Kamala Harris swiftly taking over that position. So what might Donald Trump make of it all? Well, essentially all signs show toward him being frustrated by what he is seeing here. It was, after all, the Republican convention in Milwaukee last month that made it seem like he was pretty much the favorite for the office of president this time around.
That was Philip Crowther reporting on the U.S. Democratic National Convention. In Asia, the Chinese Commerce Ministry says it is launching an anti-subsidy investigation into certain dairy products imported from the European Union. Earlier, the ministry said the country would take steps to defend the rights and interests of Chinese enterprises over the EU's plan to slap import duties on Chinese electric vehicles. Lincoln Humphreys reports.
Beijing has criticised the European Union's additional tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles as unfair competition and has vowed measures to defend the interests of Chinese firms. China's Ministry of Commerce made the remarks after the European Commission published a draft plan on Tuesday to increase import duties on Chinese EVs by up to 36.3%. The draft plan is subject to approval by EU member states. Beijing also hit back at the EU's anti-subsidy investigation, saying it was non-compliant with World Trade Organization rules.
That was Lincoln Humphreys. For more on the EU plan, Giles Gibson reports from Brussels.
Let me just run you through the tariffs for some of the big names in this announcement for the European Commission. We have tariffs of 9% for Tesla electric vehicles that are manufactured in China, higher tariffs of 17% for the largest electric vehicle manufacturer in the world, China's BYD. And also remember, those are additional tariffs on top of an existing 10% tariff that was in place before this process began. The European Commission, based in that building behind me, have been very sort of falling them over themselves really to make sure that this appears to be kind of not final, because they've been talking about these as a draft decision. They've been saying that it's an intermediate procedural step. That is partly just because of the way that Brussels works, so there's going to have to be a vote by EU member states in the autumn to finalise these. But there was also a message from the European Commission that they want to try to work with China to try and address some of their concerns. This investigation into the electric vehicle manufacturing in China was launched at the end of last year.
That's Giles Gibson in Brussels. Also in China, the Chinese video game Black Myth Wukong has shot to the top of Steam's most played games list after its official launch on Tuesday. Over 1 million people were playing the game on the platform just an hour after its debut. It has sparked excitement among players worldwide.
I am always looking out for such a heavyweight game, so when Black Myth came out, I was very moved. I hope that our domestic video games will be increasingly successful in the future. I'm sure they will.
What I found really cool was definitely the monster design, especially the different types they showcased. The tiger in that blood pool left a deep impression on me. In general, I got a glimpse of Chinese culture through it, like through other films, and that really appeals to me.
The Chinese role-playing game also won the Best Visuals award at last August's Gamescom in Cologne, Germany. The game is inspired by the ancient Chinese tale Journey to the West. Yang Chenxi explains why Wukong is deemed as such a huge milestone for the Chinese gaming industry.
August 20th, 2024 is a day to be remembered by tens of thousands of avid Chinese gamers.
It's the launch date of one of the most anticipated video games of the year, Black Myth Wukong.
The game, created by Chinese studio Game Science, has become a phenomenon in the global gaming community, with over 1.2 million digital copies pre-sold before launch. Black Myth Wukong boasts many attractions, from state-of-the-art graphics to action gameplay designs praised by industry critics.
But what solidified the milestone status of this game for many Chinese gamers who wrote page after page of these positive reviews go beyond gameplay itself, of course.
Chinese titles have been making forays onto the main stage of the global gaming scene in the past years, most notably with the success of the mobile-oriented Genshin Impact in 2020. But to many, Black Myth Wukong represents something different. It's considered a AAA game, a title reserved for top-of-the-line games for PCs and consoles, usually dominated by major Western and Japanese studios.
And remember, Game Science is a small developer, so when it released a demo video of the game back in 2020, it drew equal amounts of excitement and skepticism over whether a Chinese studio could pull off something so ambitious.
As reviews and sales now affirmed what Black Myth Wukong has accomplished, the game has unsurprisingly become a source of national pride in China over the development of the country's gaming industry and Chinese culture itself. Wukong is a character in the classic novel Journey to the West, the knowledge of which, for many non-Chinese gamers worldwide, is confined to very loose anime and game adaptations from outside China. Black Myth Wukong is the first major opportunity for a Chinese team to present its own interpretation of the ancient classic.
For the longest time, I got to play as Japanese ninjas, Arab assassins, and Greek gods, and now I'm playing as this powerful Chinese monkey in a AAA game.
China has much more to offer for the global gaming scene, and many would hope that this is only a start.
That's Yang Chenxi explaining the popularity behind the Chinese video game Black Myth Wukong. Now recapping today's headlines, a peace deal between Israel and Hamas remains elusive as US Secretary of State Antony Blinken ends his Middle East trip. Former US President Barack Obama has addressed a crowd at the Democratic National Convention to rally support for presidential nominee Kamala Harris. And the Chinese Commerce Ministry has launched an anti-subsidy investigation into certain dairy products imported from the European Union. And that's it for this edition of The Top Story, a podcast that brings you world headlines every weekday. For more news in politics, business, sports and culture, you can subscribe to the Beijing Hour, a one-hour podcast news magazine program. We would welcome and appreciate all ratings and reviews. I'm Qi Zhi. Thank you for listening.